Good evening, friends. First thing is I want to apologize that we had to wait for maybe half an hour more as we were supposed to start at 7, but because of traffic and those issues. Thank you so much for being with us. And before we introduce our esteemed speaker who has been with us many times before, but some of you might not have attended those CPDs, so it's my duty to introduce him to all of you. But before that, we have a small a celebration or felicitation to do here. That felicitation is some of our members who might have come to know through emails that they have done very, very well for themselves and not only they have done well for themselves, but brought a very, very good name for IAQS also, being the members of IAQS and associated with IAQS. These three members who achieved very good achieved this laurels, there is a saying that you don't allow the day to run you, you run the day. So these are the people who have been making the day, running the day themselves instead of allowing day to run you. And these three achievers are Asha Balachandran, Sinimol Asha, and Ramesh Palagila. Ramesh is yet to come and we will felicitate him later. But now it is time to felicitate Asha and Sini. And I'll just give a small brief about their credentials, like why they got this award or why they were nominated under this category. Ramesh was nominated under Service to QS Profession as advocacy for QS. So I think we all know that what Ramesh has been doing all along last few years. I remember that Ramesh I think got his MRICS maybe 3-4 years back, and until that point of time I think hardly, maybe only few of us knew him, and the moment he got his MRICS in somewhere in I think 3-4 years back, immediately he wasted no time, and from the day one of the next day itself he started mentoring, coaching and guiding all other youngsters or aspiring APC candidate. And because of that hard work now he was able to manage, he managed to train almost 40-50 of those APC candidates who got MRICs because of his mentoring and coaching and metrics workshop. Not only that, he has been very, very active with IAQS in general for operation of IAQS. 4-5 years back when IAQS, though we are almost 15 years old organization, but at a certain stage all of us we had lost motivation in CPD. People were not coming, and this was not really moving in the right direction. That time Ramesh came and gave a new life to IAQS, and ever since he has taken the charge of IAQS, things really started moving well, and thereafter, like all of us, we got motivated, and thereafter, under the guidance of Ajit in UAE and all, we are having regular CPDs, and this has become one of the most regular organization who is holding monthly CPDs. As you can see, this is the 9th CPD of 2013, and we are in November, so out of 9 months, out of 11 months, 9 CPD. So this is a good achievement for IAQS. So Ramesh, surely we all know that he has been a very, very deserving candidate to get this award. Then Asha Balachandran. Asha, maybe many of you may not be knowing her credentials, but maybe since I am in UAE for long now, she was one of the first MRICS, Indian MRICS who got their MRICS in Dubai. Not only she is one of the first women who got MRICS, and not only women, she was the first Indian to get MRICS. I remember in 2006-5 she got the MRICS along with Matthew Verghese. So I still remember the day when Matthew Verghese and Asha were being felicitated in IAQS, and we really used to look up to them that yes, we need to get MRICS. So they are the role models for, and at that time I can't remember that she was traveling. It's like in spite of all those difficult circumstances, she managed to get MRICS at that early age. And then thereafter, she has been working in senior role. I think maybe she is the first Indian contracts manager who managed to get this position, commercial manager to get this position in international consulting. So she has been taking the lead as far as the education is concerned, or as far as the professional growth is concerned. So that's what she is the true deserving candidate to have got this award. The award was the contribution of women in construction industry. So I think there were many, like more than I think 20-25 entries, and out of that, she and Sydney, they got nominated top 4, and finally Asha got this prize. So surely she is a very deserving candidate to have got this award. Then we have another very deserving, and we all know her, and we know her contribution to IAQS, Sydney Mohan Asha. Sydney's again credentials are that maybe after Asha, she was maybe the second woman who got MRICS in Dubai. And again, the credentials of her are that after getting a MRICS, she started contributing to IAQS in a tremendous way, that guiding and mentoring and coaching all other students. And then she was the assessor on the RICS panel. And within few interviews, or after few interviews, like her credentials were recognized by RICS, and she became the chairman of this RICS assessment panel. I think maybe she was one of the very few women who were acting as chairman for RICS APC interviews. And then, if you remember, last magazine, which IAQS published, the first magazine, she voluntarily took over the job of editor, and within a very short time and in a very pressurizing time frame, it was almost 45 days, that she managed to compile all this complete magazine with the help of all the team members. But that was, I remember that those last 1 week or 10 days, she was literally sitting in the press and making sure that magazine has been printed, and correcting, proofreading, and and during that period, not only that magazine, like she was occupied with some of her own professional things, but she managed to keep a balance between her professional things and the service to IAQS, and that is really very appreciable. And then of late, like maybe a year back, she took like another entrepreneurship step by opening her own consultancy firm, and which is again very rare for any Indian and then Indian woman to have opened her own consultancy firm. So this kind of woman who has been leading at all fronts, and she was nominated among the top 20 entries. She was one of the 4 nominations, and she came very close, and it is like our it is a matter of pride for us that 2 women, Indian women from IAQS, they were like on the top 4 and practically came close, and Asha was finally got the prize. So these kind of 3 stars which we had, and it gives me great honor and pleasure to felicitate them on this occasion. And first of all, I will request Asha to come over, and request Franklin to come over, and please hand over a small come over, and I request Cindy to come over to get the flowers from MCIWEM.
I would like to share something about this award. Today I am on this particular stage only because of RSS and IAQS. IAQS gives me, RSS gives me courage and recognize my strength and weakness and not my limitations. But IAQS, which gives me a wonderful platform to perform all these qualities. I was with IAQS as a member, then after as a team player, then regional representative, board member, and now as the management director. I strongly believe these all responsibilities are Australia. Not only me, myself, Asha, and Beamish, and all of who are making the achievements because of IAQS platform. I think I use my IAQS platform very well. I think all my senior staff who supported me, especially Orgis, Ramindra, and Johnson, and all our staff who are from the beginning, they are wishes for me, and they are supporting me with me. I would like to say thanks to all of them. In fact, I didn't receive the awards, but it was very proud honor for me to attend the function in Australia, and I am thankful to everyone. It is not justice to say nothing about Dr. Sam. he was also supporting me a lot. Today we are nothing more than special than you, myself, Sharjah or Beamish. We are same like you. You all are professionals. A true professional that you are here to attend CPDs and getting knowledge. I was also like this, but luckily God graced all to get all these achievements. Today the day came to us, tomorrow none of you. I think you all people will use this platform to perform it. God bless. Thank you.
Congratulations again to Asha, Sydney and Beamish will be coming now. In case another thing, Asha, you want to leave, maybe you're in a hurry, or in case, okay, like now I'm not trying to introduce our esteemed speaker. Mr. Gary is like family to us because this is I think third or fourth seminar that has been delivering, and we know that he's a very busy man, and in spite of that, whenever we have requested him, and why we are requesting him again and again, that every time when we have a seminar and after that when we take opinion from all of you about that how satisfied, so every time we get the maximum votes for him that that we want to have seminar again and again, and that shows that his caliber, and and his caliber comes not only from his quality of presentation, but his 35 years of experience and his academic qualification. So all that when he delivers seminar, all that comes in front of us, and surely that gives a lot of knowledge, and so surely we want to have this seminar again and again. That's what we have been troubling him all over again. So this time, before going to the topic of seminar again, I have brief. The last time also I have been reading Mr. Gary's credential, but why we need to read this again and again? Because his credentials are really very motivating for me, surely, and surely for you also, that in a professional career, what things we can achieve in a span of 30-35 years. I think he has achieved practically everything. Like he is a chartered civil engineer, he is a chartered water and environmental manager, and a chartered environmentalist, and he has 35 years of experience, and he has worked in countries like UK, Oman, Africa, Qatar and UAE, and he has worked in practically all disciplines of engineering, whether it is design, procurement, feasibility, program and project management, which happens to be today's topic, contract administration, claims, arbitration, dispute avoidance. So, and practically all fields, which hardly we get chance to work in these kind of things unless we force ourselves to diversify ourselves and try to work in all these fields. Surely, yes, what happens, we are in comfort zone and we keep on following the comfort zone, but he has moved out of himself, looks like that out of that comfort zone, and tried to work in all these fields. And in terms of what kind of projects he has done, and the projects what he has done is airports, building, roads, oil and gases, hotels, mall, offices, bridges, sewerage, irrigation, pumps, marine terminals, ports, jetties, coastal engineering work, land drainage, environmental management and development of flood defense. This is a huge kind of experience and exposure. So this is that's our we are fortunate that we have that kind of speaker with that kind of exposure and expertise. And he has done the works like program and progress management, commercial and contract management, QA QC, business development, re-engineering, and all these roles, and that also very senior roles in senior capacities like project director, chief design engineer, senior resident engineer, specialist construction consultant, company director, and then working for government organizations in UK and writing papers. So it's unbelievable, his credentials, and I really want to congratulate personally and on behalf of IBPC to Mr. Gary to have such a bright career span. And the topic what he has selected, and that we do not have many CPDs on those kind of topics, which is program and project management. So I think this is one of the new topics which we will be learning, and I welcome Mr. Gary to come and deliver the seminar. Please, Mr.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I'd like to reiterate apologies for being late. It took me 2.5 hours to get from Abu Dhabi. If I'd known it was going to be so much fun, I would have had a practice run last week. First, even if I speak with a lisp, I've got a puppy, and it came flying across the garden the other week like a Scud missile, and I took my 2 teeth out, so it's my revenge is that I can't whistle yet, but when I do get my whistling teeth back, you'll know about it. How many contractors have we got amongst us tonight? Okay, all hiding at the back there. And consultants? Okay. Okay, and what's the other? From the employer side? How many from the employer side? Okay, good. That must have been a good spread tonight. Well, first again, congratulations to the ladies. Wow. Okay, tonight's presentation. Richard Chamberlain, who's been doing some presentations recently on program and project management, and he's done quite a run. Has anybody been to his presentations recently? Okay, right, one person. He's coupled things, and I think in a slightly different way, some areas in depth as well. I've not been to them, but because this was, if you like, a new topic that was being introduced, my partner was supposed to be here tonight, business partner, but unfortunately can't be. And so what we've tried to do here is to introduce you to the higher level, which gives a lot of opportunity for other speakers to come in and fill in the bits and pieces. So it's kind of setting an overall umbrella for program and project management. And is anybody familiar with program management, or has anybody been involved in program management as a whole? Okay, yeah. Program management, years ago, it came from the NASA program, the American space program, and it came about because there was so many projects to manage that they realised there was a huge gap in coordinating these projects. So they introduced project or program management, which is where it comes from. It comes from the NASA space missions. And from that, the Americans were very good at introducing it and overlaying it on top of projects as such, so you can have multiple projects. And program management takes care of those. It's the front end, if you like, of it. And thank you. Okay. If you look at the very good, right. Thank you. If we look at the project execution, and the very first part of it, the inception side, we have the program management. And obviously, following that, you have the project management phases, the pre-construction, construction, and post-construction. And within it, in if you like, a normal employer design build scenario, you would have the design followed by the construction, followed by defects liability, etc., etc. And these are the, if you like, the main principles as to where the program and project management aspects fit in terms of construction. Thank you. Now, when we look at what this means in terms of money and return on investment and such like, we have the employer investment and the return on the left-hand side, the axis, and as we go forward, you have the project execution and of course the operation. And obviously, the green is the inception, design, construction, and eventually defects liability. And of course, as we go through that, we start off with the employer who's shelling out of his pocket. And of course, it's not until you actually get to a certain period within the facility's operation that there's any actual payback or return on his investment. Thank you. And similarly, the cost and control, the characteristics here, the degree of control and the cost of that control. Of course, it varies, but how does this vary? Well, from the inception, you have the employer who has a greater level of control. As this goes through the design stage, he may start relinquishing some of that control, but of course the employer costs start accelerating from the very beginning, where it's low cost, right the way through to right at the end, after the construction period, where he has shelled out all his money. or a lot of it. Now, at a point in between, you have this crossover point where the employer's control and his cost actually starts becoming an equilibrium. Thank you. So, when we look at the program management, we're looking at the identification, development and inception of the preliminary elements. This is to confirm things like the feasibility study and to establish the technical parameters, commercial parameters and financial parameters. And it's the program manager who provides the final focus for the project commencement. Thank you. The program management, or many of the program management issues that you may come across, setting out at the beginning the concepts and the plans that may have to be developed. You've got the land use, transportation, the life cycle costing, design standards, management. The project planning and controls, of course, are very important. The contracts and the packaging. The project procedures, again, these should always be bespoke to any particular project. The summary cost plans, of course, and then we go into the procurement and facilitation, which are the types of contracts and such like, which I'll come on to. Thank you. Okay, project.
Maybe you can go to auto mode for the next slide.
Okay, project strategy. In the grey, we have the employer's elements where he controls directly. The project objectives overall, generally speaking, here have had defined from his initial thought, planning and business case, perhaps on the financial side, which is obviously the finance and funding for the employer. He'll also have his legal and insurance behind the scenes as well. When we come to the actual project requirements and the operational maintenance and the risk management, we come down through the process of the work breakdown structure, or the operational breakdown structure, through to the project team and the organisation. We've got the environmental health and safety, QA aspect. We've got the project controls, which again is exceptionally important. And underneath this, you have the concept design, scheme, detail design, followed by procurement, and of course construction, and then eventually testing and commissioning. Thank you. Will it work from here?
Should work.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the contracting strategy. It's a shame we can't see the left axis. If we take a reimbursable type contract on the left-hand side, for instance, we have a target or performance or incentive, or maybe a hybrid shared risk type of contract. And then on the right-hand side, we have a lump sum. And the contractor's risk with a reimbursable contract, generally speaking, he has much lower risk because he's going to get paid on a reimbursable basis, or at least that's a theory. And as we go through target, performance, incentive, we go through a shared risk element. And then, obviously, with lump sum, the contractor takes the majority of the risk. The employer's risk, on the other hand, diminishes. He starts to take a lot of risk with a reimbursable contract because he has to pay for it whether he likes it or not. Coming down to a shared risk and this crossover point. And GMP, guaranteed maximum price contracts, or hybrids thereof, started to come into vogue in this country in about 2008. Unfortunately, the crash happened before they were actually able to be launched by most of the major developers in this country. But they were heading towards GMP type contracts, partnership style approach with a contractor. And that was a very interesting time. Unfortunately, so the wind got taken out of the sails because the big crash occurred. Okay, generic contract structure, you'll all be familiar with this. You've got the form, which, for want of a better phrase, is the deal. The contract conditions, which is the legal element of it. The contract coordination procedures, which is the project management. And the contract annexes, which is the technical and of course specifications and the like. And it's from here where the actual contract type needs to be determined. If we look at the following stage, once that is done, you've got the standard instructions for tender, which is the employer's remit. You've then got the type of the contract, the form of agreement, the conditions, general and special. And then you've got the employer's requirements, which have got a whole plethora of issues for which he is requiring, what he is wanting to deliver his project. And finally, you've got, before you go into the tender stage, you've got the form of tender, etc. Okay, so when we're looking at the path to the contract award, there may be 5 or perhaps more tenders at that particular point in time. We start with the instructions to tender collection, of course. Tender submissions. There may be a letter of intent at some point, may not. However, the bidding, generally speaking, goes on, and there is continual competition throughout the post-tender stage, post-tender meetings, post-tender clarifications, until eventually we get to the letter of acceptance, and then we have the contract execution. Once the contract execution arises, then we go into the project management stage proper, and this is the coordination and control of the entire effort to achieve a defined objective. And we're looking to achieve it within the final approved budget, within predetermined final timescales, and to a specified standard and quality. All pretty much similar for every project, but every project has got its challenges. Now, if we look at the various elements of project management in the span, you'll probably be quite familiar with how many elements of the word management comes after certain words. And you've got project and success criteria management, strategy, your project management plan. You have value management, risk management, quality management, health, safety and environmental management. These are the strategic elements of project management. Then you've got the control, the work content and scope management. Everything has the word management written after it because it all comes under this umbrella of project management. So you've got the work content and scope, you've got time scheduling, resource, budgeting, change control, document management, information system management. Then we go into the technical side. I won't bother reading these. There's a lot there in the technical, of which obviously the one that probably stands out to everybody is the value engineering. And then we have the commercial management, which I'm sure everybody's more familiar with, which translates the business case into the project brief and then the design brief. Then we go into the actual contractual and commercial matters, financial, and of course procurement and the contract delivery. We also have the organisational management within the overall bubble, if you like, of project management. We have the life cycle design, life cycle management, design, development, and opportunity, the implementation, coordination, organisation, structure, and we have the organisational roles. These are all within the bubble of organisational management. And then of course we have the people management, which is perhaps the most difficult thing to get right with projects in this country, because you have so many different nationalities and people with different backgrounds and different qualifications. It always creates a huge problem. Different people have different agendas. Different companies have different agendas, and this is where a lot of the problems and the disputes arise, normally at project level. Okay, the project. When we look at the management triangle, we have the usual, the quality and functionality or performance. We have the cost, and we have the time schedule itself, all of which put together gives you the scope of work. And it's all within an overall business environment, that being things which require assumptions. You have the expectations from the employer, and of course you have the risk and uncertainty. This is one of the major focuses and one of the major problems, which is why a project works or does not work, as to how well the risk is actually managed. And again, if we look at some of the key themes that come out of project management, we have this preemptive control which needs to be exercised. We have delivering the value for money, and we have the risk, all of which are interconnected by the communication and the information flow. Now, if we go to the risk evaluation, some of you may have seen this before, this slide, I'm not sure. And I've already had a few people. This is one of a presentation on risk that's been aired so many times, I hate to think. But when we look at the risk on a project, there's a couple of slides I've put in here. We're looking at evaluating the probability or the likelihood of something happening. And we evaluate the impact or consequence of something happening. Quite often you see risk management being defined in this format of a table, whereby you have a probability impact of simple things like hardly likely down to highly likely, and you have impact defined as low, medium or high impact. And within that matrices you have a variety of different levels of risk actually arising. You can have, so the low risk is in the green if you can see it, the goldy yellow is the medium, and obviously the red is the high risk. So you can see it's migrating from low through to, it's migrating from low through to high as it becomes highly likely. However, we should always consider the type of risk independently for cost, quality and time. And we should consider the business case as well, the overall higher level. That's the common approach. This is a not so common approach, which is to use more refined ranges in risk management. We develop the probability impact ranges for time and cost in particular. That's the focus. Probability multiplied by the impact gives you a risk score. If we have something that is highly likely, 90%, and a high impact, 80%, if you take it as 0.9 and a 0.8, then you've got 0.72, and it's highlighted on the far side there. Unfortunately, we do it technically. There we go. It's highlighted there as 0.72. So, on your risk register, if you have a good risk register, you can easily use a matrices like this to give you some very powerful information, because not only are you looking at cost, time, quality and the business scope individually for every single risk, individually, but you're also looking at those risks in terms of the probability of something happening and the impact of something happening. And if you use these two little formulas down below, including the probability percentage, impact percentage divided by 2, multiplied by the reciprocal of the number of weeks. It all sounds like science fiction, but it works. It gives you a risk priority rating. This actually works. And in a spreadsheet, it is so simple to do this, so simple. And it really does give a fascinating insight. Now, if we look at it from a quantitative perspective as to real measurement, what do we get out of it? Fine, we can have a risk register, you can have a low impact, a high impact, you can have different indices, and you can try and identify what the risk is, and it can tell you all about it. But how do we actually put numbers against it? And this is how we do it. We take the cost impact. Let's say that everybody agrees, we have a cost meeting, we have a risk management meeting, and everybody agrees that if a particular risk is going to happen, then the likely cost of that is going to be 100,000 dirhams. The probability of it happening, if the majority of people agree there's a very high probability of that event actually happening, then let's say you take a 0.9 or a 90% probability and you multiply that by its impact, you come up with 90,000 dirhams as a potential cost contingency. Time, similarly. If it's likely to say 100 man hours, then the time contingency, again, is the probability of that particular happening, of that risk, multiplied by the 100 man hours. Potentially, you've got 90 man hours, which you can lose if you don't manage that risk properly. So these simple elements, they provide the contingency for cost and time. If you do this on your risk register, for every risk you've got, with real people, real assessments as to what the actual impacts are in terms of time and cost, and the $1 billion dirham project in Abu Dhabi. The contractor had put 80 million in the bid, which he won, and that was to cover what he said was his risk. 80 million. When I did the evaluation using his project team over a 3-week period, his 80 million was nothing. There was over 350 million in real project risk, because he was thinking, well, it doesn't matter, I've got 80 million there, that will cover anything, any eventuality. Wrong. Big time wrong. And he was rallying around for several weeks trying to get a risk team together and employ someone who could actually facilitate the risk management because it scared the living daylights out of him. So if you want to scare somebody, you can get the risk register out. Okay, how can the project risk be managed? Well, of course, they can be avoided, they can be removed from the scope completely. They can be accepted, it can be transferred, and of course it can be mitigated, as in reducing operational uncertainty through the application of project procedures, one method. So when we're deciding how to manage the risk, we need to always consider what will be done and what is the residual risk. So if we do anything to mitigate it, or whatever we do to manage that risk, there is going to be a residual risk, and we need to develop contingency options for the residual risk. We also need to consider the secondary risks arising from those contingency options. So it's a risk-driven process. It goes around. Whatever you do, you need to consider what is happening and what is the outcome from that. So that's the risk side of things. And this takes us back into the first element of the project management, which is the design management triangle. And again, we have the project manager, design consultant and a cost consultant, three principal parties that may or may not exist in a particular project. Value engineering being the centerpiece as to where they're all headed, because that's obviously one of the employer's main aims. And the project manager and the design consultant will normally focus on managing and minimising the risk. The project manager and the cost consultant together will be looking at the time elements, what the impacts are of both the design and of course the risks. And the design consultant and the cost consultant will be looking to actually satisfy the project brief as a whole. So that gives you a flavour of, if you like, the employer's expectations and how various parties to a project would be expected to perform during the delivery of that project. Value engineering technique, something I'm sure everybody's been involved in, 6 fundamental phases: investigation, speculation, evaluation, validation, presentation, and finally implementation. And this is really about controlling the risk of designing the project. This is where your value engineering comes into its own game. Never forget whole life costing and functionality. Okay, project life cycle. We're now going from the instruction to tender to the contract award. And once the instructions to tender are issued, we go through the usual process of the tender queries, clarifications, the tender receipt and evaluation, the post-tender contract negotiations, and finally the target of the contract award. Now this is where the employer needs to maintain an element of control, because he starts off with, in the instructions to tender and the project brief, he has an idea of what he wants. This is what the employer requires, and that's in the employer's requirements, normally in specs. What we end up with, after all this process of, from the instructions to tender to the contract award, we end up with something that might be different, and that is whatever the parties agree. And the way the project manager has got to handle this is to look at what the risks are of introducing or reintroducing uncertainty into the project overall. So the impact of the tender process. There are secondary areas here where you have the employer's requirements as a whole, and you've got risks poking at it in every direction. You've got the tender documents which carry inherent risks, and normally they provide the seed for contention, ambiguities, confusion and everything else. This is offset by the employer's clarifications, additional information and of course employer's changes. And on the opposite side of the scale you have the contractor's queries, the qualifications or perhaps called clarifications, and the contractor's alternatives that he may or may not be permitted to produce, and you have any contractor's omissions for which he cannot or not want to be involved in. So we have the scales, and when it comes to a tender evaluation, no matter what happens, generally speaking, it's the price that bears the heaviest burden. And despite you have a plethora of QA, health and safety, contractors, personnel management, competence, all of these issues for which build up the project and deliver it, on the other side you have a number, and that's what it comes down to. It's the risk and reward, and within that there has to be an acceptable level of compliance or alternatives, and of course an acceptable level of qualifications that are actually in line with the project delivery. If we look at the work cycle here, again we've got the project manager control and indeed the employer's direction, and this takes us from detailed engineering through the procurement, construction, pre-commissioning, practical completion. And you'll notice that further down in this cycle we actually have things like the calculations, the specs, drawings, and in the procurement we have the purchase orders and the subcontracts that have to be issued. And obviously through construction we have the various items that are constructed and the quantities. This is where control is needed by all parties, but particularly the project manager who will be overseeing this on behalf of the employer. And eventually we come to the pre-commissioning and the practical completion or taking over, whereby these systems are intended to be complete and maybe fit for its purpose, such terms included. So this is the deliverables, monitoring performance and acting on any shortfalls that occur during that entire process. Now if we look at the project procedures, and although a basic structure will be common, it says here each procedure needs to be customised to suit a particular organisation, as well as the project manager's contractual responsibilities. It's very important that project procedures are not taken off the shelf from a previous project, dusted off and try to apply them. Because 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100 it won't work and there'll be major problems occurring. Each procedure should focus on one linked activity from beginning to end and should ensure the involvement of all relevant parties. Each procedure should specify who does what, when, how and with what resources. Each procedure should preferably adopt the ISO 9001 content approach, and the 9001 approach is the famous the purpose, the scope, definitions, responsibilities, instructions, references and attachments. That's the general format. As I say, it's particularly important that project procedures are developed specifically, bespoke for every project. If a procedure is more than about 5 pages long, then there's something very wrong. Very wrong indeed. I've seen project procedures that can only be used to hold doors open because they're ridiculous. Who's going to read them? Nobody. They're going to be put on a shelf. I certainly wouldn't bother. No. If it's functional and it can be beta tested, then all well and good. But they should be meaningful. They should be project specific. They should give the guidance, perhaps in a flowchart format, as a single page if necessary. But it's very important to have these in place. A lot of projects fail, even from the beginning, because they don't have project procedures. So they don't need to be long. A single page is perhaps sufficient if it's done properly. And if it's done in a flowchart format, identifying the parties responsible and the actions that are required, or the process that is required simply, then it tends to provide not only control, but also a pathway for delivery. Okay, the balancing control. This is balancing the change control against the project control. You have the employer obviously on one side and you have the contractor on the other, whereas the employer controls the approvals, instructions, decisions and the changes and whether or not he's going to create any delays. The contractor has the responsibility and control over deliverables, the programme, the scheduling of those programmes, the progress and indeed the performance. And in this regard the employer takes the risk for any changes that he may introduce, whereas the contractor would be looking for reward in terms of his deliverables and achieving those goals. leads us into the project control loop, where we start off with a potential variation, and having examined it, we may require an immediate recourse to a recovery plan of some description, or we may need to be considering it. We consider the accept the need for change, and that takes us into a change control loop. And whilst we're looking at the, if you like, the change control process or procedure, we're also executing a particular change. We're measuring it, which has its own small loop to compare, adjust, and feedback in. And eventually, we have a project control loop, project control, which is actually completed within the overall change control procedure. Let me just pop that one in. The change control loop itself, we start by perhaps the external employer or contractor. We come down to identifying the change, the evaluation, employer review. We're going to have a change and not detailed evaluation, again employer's review, implement the change, and then we go back to the program itself. And it won't actually be refreshing the baseline. Baseline is a baseline, that's a one-off program. It can never be called a baseline program again if it has changed for any reason. It could become an estimated variation program, or it could become a recovery program, depending on the contractor's fault. But a baseline program is a one-off program. It can never be a revision to a baseline. It just can't happen. Project life cycle. Okay, here we go into the defects liability period in particular, where we go from practical completion to the final account. The project manager control element and of course the contractor's action. Here we go through the commissioning or perhaps pre-commissioning, performance testing, warranty period, final acceptance and perhaps the final account. And again, we have these targets at the bottom where has the project been delivered in time? Has the performance been satisfactory? Is it available? From a warranty, from a project perspective, is it reliable? Is it maintainable? And finally, has it been delivered to budget? So this is what the parties are looking at, or should be looking at, in terms of the final goal, the final account. Project closure. So we look at the pre-contract and the assessment side of things at the beginning. We're standing back at the end of the project saying, how did this project go? And we review the identification, classification, strategy and control method. And then we look at how the project actually went, progressed during, let's say, the construction stage, project execution and implementation. And we look at how the risk and uncertainty was managed. Did we identify and quantify the change? And was there an opportunity to adjust the costs and the time to suit the actual methodology and procurement of the entire contract strategy during project execution? And finally, you have perhaps the post-execution, which is where you have potential recourse, certainly from a contractor's perspective and or the employer's perspective, because they may claim as well. And this is where we have potential for claims and disputes. So it's closing out these residual issues that become quite important. The balance sheet. The employer is going to be looking at what his needs are and as to whether or not the scope has been fully completed. Has the completion date been met? Performance and quality, are they satisfactory? Are they what is required? Has he got benefit or had to impose liquidated damages, perhaps even against his will? And then you've got the contractor's guarantees and bonds, which are always up for grabs. And operating revenue, is that being delivered or is there something stopping that? And you have the contractor, he's looking at the final contract price and he's also looking at the final contract cost. And he's going to be balancing those two to see whether or not he's actually made a profit at the end of the day. Excuse me. There may be elements for claims for additional costs, and he may indeed want to be submitting claims for extension of time to relieve him of liquidated damages or penalties. And then we have the final the cost of claim recovery. In other words, whatever it costs him to do that claim, which can be quite costly, 3 or 4 people being tied up for 6 months is going to be an enormous amount of effort. It's deemed to be included within the contract because it's foreseeable. There are mechanisms with the contract that have provisions for extension of time. It's a little bit unfair that the contractor should be hit with these if there have been variations, and he's got to try and justify where his additional costs are. So he'll be looking at the cost of the claim recovery. Okay, claim assessment. Coming to the end. We're looking at, when assessing a claim, obviously you look at the issues involved. You're looking at the contractor's objectives. You're looking at the basis of the arguments. This is the conditions of contract and cause and effect. The weight of the supporting evidence and the relevance of that supporting evidence, of course. And then we look at the legal and contractual foundation. If the contract is one where recourse for a dispute is to go to court, then clearly you'd be looking not only at the contract but also at the legal articles or perhaps the civil code or commercial code or the likes. If it's an arbitration, then the first port of call is the conditions of contract in their own right. And of course, you're always looking at what the appropriate relief is in the circumstances. Again, as I say, it's a realistic assessment and obviously an appropriate response. Now, if we look at the claims defence, we're looking at to identify the parties' duties and obligations. We identify any performance shortfalls, where and why. We evaluate the link between cause and effect. We separate employer and contractor issues. We identify counter-arguments and claims. Prepare relevant supporting evidence. And overall, it needs to be presented professionally and in writing, and with pictures that explain these things. A picture tells 1,000 words. The easier you can make it for any person to see it and to explain it, the easier it will be to either to defend or to present a claim of any nature. So, a bit of fun. In times gone by, buildings, they were made largely of stone and timber. Now we're looking at, say, 12th century here. Castles and cathedrals. And after all we've gone through tonight about the intricacies as to what we do and how we manage projects, the employer, well, he was likely to be the king or another. The programme, it wasn't in days, weeks or months. It was in decades and centuries. The employer's representative, learned staff, maybe a knight of the realm. The project manager, the one with the biggest sword, he who wins. And you've got the contractor, the engineer and the architect, all the same person, the master mason. That's how it was. He was the equivalent of God on site. He ran everything. And nowadays, of course, although this is hundreds and hundreds of years ago, what do we call it? We can call it a prime cost reimbursement contract. Now the client and trades, it's a construction management contract. So even though it's hundreds and hundreds of years ago, the principles have not changed too much, just the time element of the programme. And if we go back, I mean the element, the era I'm talking of is really sort of around the 12th to 14th century, which is the agricultural era. After the agricultural era, we went into the industrial era. And right now, since the end of the industrial era, we are deemed to be in the services era. That's what we are physically in right now. We've come out of industrial, we're now in services. It all started happening in 1666, particularly because of the UK, the Great Fire of London, allegedly started by an accident. And later, we had the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, early 19th century. We had the engineer, who was military, and then eventually they became civil, and hence a term civil engineer, non-military. And the civil engineer then started to diversify and taking on board the structures, the roads, bridges, railways, sewage, water supply, etc., etc. A lot of this came out again, because of the Great Fire of London in 1666, and the need to start replanning it, and the need for skills, a variety of multidisciplinary skills. And that is what happened. In those days you had the architects that dealt with aesthetics and spatial use and interior decorating. And they would be the ones who were hovering around the engineer saying, please give me some work. And of course, out of all of this came the QS. Congratulations. And so thus the modern roles were born. Bit of fun, as I say. Okay, so summary. We've had a quick look at the program management elements, which is an overview function. We've looked at the project management and the project control and delivery elements. And the ingredients here overall is the right people doing the right things. And if that works, it'll be wonderful to hear it. I'd love any feedback on that score. Thank you, and I'll close it there because I know we have questions. Thank you very much indeed. Okay.
Thank you so much, Gary, for being with us and giving us a wonderful presentation. It was so informative and educational. Can we give a big round of applause? Bangala, UAE General Secretary, UAE IAQS Board General Secretary, to give a small memento as a token of appreciation and love. Before the start of the meeting, we have appreciated three important members of IIQS for achieving, a great award from Australian Institute of Quantitative Surveyors, and their mentor actually spoken at length about Sinimol, about Asha, and our dear Ramesh. So I don't want to really add anything more than that. In fact, as far as the QS profession is concerned, any award doesn't actually add value to Ramesh. In fact, Ramesh adds value to those awards. Can we give one? Can I ask our founder, Mr. Syed Aslam, please come forward to give that very, very important award to Ramesh. I would request Mrs. Rekha to join because he has been a very, very true support to Ramesh.
In the future, I would like to request all the members to nominate for any type of awards, and this is a trial we did it. In the future, this is a motivation for all of you, and definitely all we can do in the future along. And I am promising I will nominate next time.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to welcome Gary again. As he told that this is an overview of what we plan for next year. So each slide is a presentation itself. So it was just to have a glimpse of what's all about project management, how to manage costs. So thank you very much again for coming, and Gary for accepting our invitation. And we would like to have your partner in February.
Anytime. Thank you.
Thank you.